All right. Well, it is 11:02 AZ time on my clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it and apologize for any confusion of when the webinar was starting. Daylight savings time has proven to be a tricky opponent for the Arizona resident who set up the webinar. Sorry about that. So without further ado, this clock confuser's name is Maddie Wagner, and I am the digital marketing specialist for Johnson Consulting Group. Today we have Vince Robert, Senior Business Consultant at JCG, and Jason Cavett, Chief Technical Officer of Web Cemeteries. Jason and Vince are here to discuss and review the needs of a successful cemetery website. And as a reminder, if time allows, Jason and Vince may take a couple questions at the end, so you can type those into the Q&A area of your control panel during the presentation. But as we mentioned, that we'll try to answer those if we have time at the end. And with that, Vince, take it away.
Thanks, Maddie, and hello, everyone. My colleagues and I at Johnson Consulting work with a variety of cemetery owners and managers, probably some of you on the call today. And we're generally working on topics that relate to either performance or strategy. Those are sort of the two big buckets that so much of what we do relates to. And in general, we're always looking for improvements, perhaps new technology, new processes, new information. And all of these things translate towards a result. And those results come in the form of a stronger position in the marketplace for your cemetery, perhaps improved experience for your client families. Ultimately, it boils down to increased operating and financial performance for the firm. And JCG, in our walls, in our 4 virtual walls these days, has a tremendous amount of industry experience. But we still seek out companies like Web Cemeteries for partnerships. And we do that so that we can bring additional value to our clients, such as our webinar today, and to continue to network and learn as an industry. So we're very pleased to have Web Cemeteries on the call today. Jason from Web Cemeteries, the Chief Technical Officer, who's going to be talking a little bit about one of the technology solutions that they have. And I think it's one that we're very familiar with, and that's websites, something that so many of us are familiar with on the consumer side. How many times do we interact with a company's website on a daily basis? So I'd like to thank Jason for being on the call and really just turn it over to him, he's going to dive in and give us some very helpful and meaningful information on what a cemetery website should look like. And as we go through today, again, let's think about how that relates to our strategy as a business, and eventually how that can change the performance on the ground level. So with that, I'll turn things over to Jason, and thanks again for being here, Jason.
Yeah, thank you, Vince. Appreciate that, and thank you to Johnson Consulting, Maddie and Vince for having me here today. I'm really excited to speak about this topic. It's one I'm very passionate about, is building an effective website. Before I get into that, though, it's been a little while since I've seen all of you, and I wanted to kind of reintroduce myself to those of you who I've met before at various industry events, and introduce myself to those who I haven't spoken with yet. But my name's Jason Cavett, Chief Technical Officer at Web Cemeteries, and I have always loved technology. And in fact, as I was putting this presentation together, I was reminded of a story where when I was in middle school, I got one of those TI programming calculators, and I love the thing. And I liked programming it far more than I liked doing algebra 1 and 2. So I spent time programming it to do my work for me. And a friend found out, another friend found out, and I started selling phone apps for $5 a pop to my entire class and other classes. And I still remember the look on my mom's face when she found the $600 in my piggy bank, how pleased she was that I was not selling drugs, that it was actually web apps or applications I was selling. But that really highlights how important it is to me that it's not technology for technology's sake. I love how technology can help people. And that's underscored my entire education focus, my career, and then the two most recent endeavors, both a company I started, Cavitech, which builds websites for small businesses, not specifically focused on cemeteries, and of course, Web Cemeteries itself. And at Web Cemeteries, one of the services that we offer is building websites specific to cemeteries. We've helped hundreds of clients do this. And we also offer software specifically geared to help cemeteries connect with visitors on their website. So in preparing the presentation today, I've drawn ideas and principles out of the successes that we've seen in working with these clients. And by the end, I hope that you have some knowledge that you can take away from here and apply it to your own website, apply it to your own technology, and better serve the families that are coming and looking for you. All right. So with that said, I want to start. I love stats. I'm an engineer. I want to start with a stat. And the stat is that 64% of small businesses have a website in 2021. Now, that statistic amazed me. And why did it amaze me? Well, it amazed me because 36% don't. Shocking. And why does it matter? Why is it so critical to have a website in 2021? Well, there's really two reasons for it. Two kind of areas I want to focus. One is a bit more general, and one is going to be more specific to our industry. So let's start with the general reasoning first. And that's this other statistic that 81% of people search online for a product or service before they ever consider buying it. That number does overwhelmingly favor ages 50 years and younger, but 81%, I'm sure you've done it yourself. Out of that, another interesting statistic is that every month, Google sees approximately 40 to 60 billion searches in the United States. Of those searches, about half of those have what Google calls local intent. And what local intent is, you've probably done it yourself: cemeteries near me, plumbers in my area, parks to visit. Those are all local intent searches. Why that's important is when users find what they want in a local search, the likelihood of visiting that business increases about 35%. So if you aren't coming up early and often, or if your website just isn't available or doesn't have some of the good practices I'll be talking about in a short while here, you may have missed your chance to ever engage further. It's crucial that you come up and that you're visible. Now, more specific to our industry, and I know I'm preaching to the choir for these first two, is that what people are looking for have changed and how people are shopping have changed. The one that, of course, everybody here I'm sure is familiar with is the aftercare alternatives that have been changing over time. Cremation, obviously the big one, seen a lot of changes in green burials. And one that I'm really liking that I'm seeing, and we're seeing this more and more often in our searches for the websites that we do monitor and track their information, is memorial experiences. Families who are looking for ways to honor loved ones that isn't a traditional burial, but is actually even almost a party atmosphere of sorts. So that's causing a shift in how people are shopping and what they're looking for. Additionally, major cultural changes. There's a huge shift happening in religion right now in the United States, which of course that leads to a difference in how people think about the afterlife, how they think about death, the practices that they follow in that. And there's also a higher awareness and a cultural standpoint of environmental impacts. So particularly in younger generations, I was following a thread in Reddit, which is a social media platform, discussing burial options, discussing what's available. Someone was asking about options for their family member. And there was very clearly awareness from the folks responding about environmental impacts of creation, environmental impacts of burial. So that is an awareness that it's important to have a focus on, because that again is changing what people are looking for and changing how they're buying when they find a cemetery website. The one I'll be focusing in on today centers around technology expectations. Technology expectations clearly have been shifting across all industries and have been affecting all industries, but specific to the cemetery industry is that consumers first expect a digital first experience. More and more, they're expecting that they will find you online, that they will be able to seamlessly transition between channels. So I find you online and I send you an email through your contact form. If I call later, it should say, it should be, oh, Mr. Jones, yes, we got your query about your mother's property. There shouldn't be any hiccup. That's an expectation that continues to advance. One question I usually get around this one, and I want to head this off, is digital first does not mean digital only. You don't need to give up on individualized care. I've met so many wonderful people throughout the years working at web cemeteries who clearly are passionate about helping loved ones work through the difficult times of a family's death, or families helping through the difficult times of a loved one's death, excuse me there. But you have to get in front of those people first. And there's subtle things happening within that. So for example, younger generations are far less likely to contact you if the only way to engage is with a phone number. So again, getting out in front on that digital first experience is becoming more and more of an expectation. Online visibility. Now, unfortunately, I can't see a show of hands, but I suspect if I ever asked how many people have ever navigated to the wasteland that is the second page of Google search results, I wouldn't see too many hands go up. You don't go to page 2 of Google search results. You stay on that first page. And why is that? Well, Google's done such a good job of creating an environment of trust. If it shows up near the top, you can more likely trust it. It must be a better company. It must be a better group. It must be a better organization. Cemeteries aren't exempt from this. You want to show up at the top and often. And then, assuming you do, once somebody lands on your website and they find your website, what's your site saying about you? Are you giving your website the same care and attention that you do your gardens, your front gate, and your lawn mowing? I actually, in preparation for this, something I did is I'm in the Philadelphia area, and I did a search for cemeteries near me. So one of those local intent searches. The first 25 cemeteries that came up, of the first 25 cemeteries that came up in the list, only 3 of those had a decent website. And I'll say decent in that it at least shared what what they offered, but it was kind of a corporate, kind of a bland website. One of those had a website that was completely broken, and the other 21 had nothing. Some didn't even have a phone number to contact them. It took until cemetery 26, which is about 35 to 40 minutes away from where I'm at, where there was a good website that talked about what they did. It had their online presence. I could get their phone number and an email address. And that happened to be actually a cemetery that Web Cemetery serves, both with our management system, as well as we built them a website and offer our public tools via their website. So that's crucial, because if I was actually a buyer and I was searching for a cemetery that I could trust with my loved one's care, 25 of those cemeteries might have just lost my business, even though one of those is only 4 minutes down the road from me. So that's an aspect. There's trust and transparency in your digital presence. And the last is knowledgeable and capable care. The customers are becoming more savvy. They're going to come with knowledge at their fingertips, quite literally, and they come in knowing more. Now, it doesn't mean they know all the right things. I'm guessing some of you have fielded questions where the question is asking about the way to do something, which happens to be another state's laws. But if your website demonstrates that knowledge, demonstrates that trust, it gives you an opportunity to get in front of those questions and to help guide the buying process. So when a family comes and visits you, or a customer comes and walks onto your property, their knowledge is lining up with what you would talk with them about. So don't miss that opportunity. There's an expectation from customers that, yeah, well, I can trust this cemetery. They know what they're talking about because it lines up with what I've learned as I've researched. So hopefully in just these first couple slides here, I've set the expectation that every business should have a website in 2021. And I gotta admit, it's a do as I say, not as I do situation for a little bit. My other company, Cavitech, did not have a website for its first few years of operation. I was working off of word of mouth referrals. The business was going well. And then I decided I better get a website built. Within the first 2 months of launching, I had 4 cold leads that turned into business straight from my site. So if you don't have a website at all right now, make that a priority. I strongly urge you to make that a priority. So, okay, let's assume you agree and we're ready to move on. Then the next question is, how do you begin? I'm going to guide you through the rest of this presentation, probably about the next 25 to 30 minutes. I'm I'm going to guide you with some information that will be helpful, hopefully helpful to you if you are deciding to build a brand new site or updating a current website, or even if you already have a professional team working on it or a marketing team working on your site. There's always room for improvement. So hopefully this can give you some ideas to be thinking about for your site. A successful website, now, there's a lot of areas you can focus on, but there's 4 main areas that a successful website should focus on: purpose, demographic, site flow and user experience, or you might see the initials UX for user experience, and technical. And I'm going to go through each one of these going forward here. So the purpose. Whenever I or one of my designers sits down with a cemetery, the first question we ask is, why does your website exist? And funny enough, sometimes the response I get back is, well, I need one. Okay, well, why do you need one? And through that discussion, through that discovery process, there's 3 common purposes that tend to come out from a cemetery. You can see them here, but what's important is it's so important to identify what the top common purpose is, to focus, because that's going to change the design. That's going to change the calls to action. It's going to change how the site is built and designed, because you have different goals. So for example, if improving sales, you want to drive people to your cemetery, you want to interact with those families, then that might make you focus on strong calls to action. You might have a tighter focus on services and products. They might come up in front and center. You might have guidance on your website if you have articles or other information on how to purchase, what to expect, resources on what to do when a loved one has passed away, something like that. If building trust is an example, is something, demonstrate the beauty of your cemetery. People trust beauty. Provide knowledge and show the care that your cemetery takes in taking care of the families that you serve. Show that through your site. And one that I find very interesting in a number of cemeteries that Web Cemeteries serves is cemeteries that have a very strong community interaction. They maybe have events at their cemetery. They open their cemetery to almost as a park. Demonstrate that. That builds community trust. Cemeteries are hyper local. There's only so much of an area you can generally serve. Build trust by showing how you're serving that community. So again, that purpose, the reason that's number 1 in this list is because that purpose will then feed into the rest of the site design and build. So the next question that comes up then is, who is your site serving? Now, before I talk about who the site serves, we should talk about who it does not serve, at least not directly. And so, big warning, pay attention, because the number 1 mistake I see when building a website is that the website is built to serve yourself. Now, ultimately, yes, if you're trying to drive sales, that is going to serve the cemetery. That's exactly a goal. But the website is there to serve your customers. It's there to serve those families. And just some red flags you can be watching out for that I've seen over the years. One of those might be the About Us page. Okay, it's important to have pride about your cemetery. You obviously want to talk about what you do and how you do it. But I've seen it where the About Us page receives hours and hours of focus and design, and then the product and services page, there's a price sheet that's tossed over, and I put some generic photos of some coffins on the page. That's probably a red flag. If families are coming to buy, they want to know, well, what are you going to offer me? How are you going to help me? How are you going to build trust with me that I know you're going to take care of my loved one who just passed away? Another possible common flag is that the site should be designed for ways that users will be visiting the site. And what I mean there is mobile use. So when we're working with cemeteries, they're often in the office, they're at a desktop, a nice big screen, but you should be also looking at any new site you're building in mobile view. Does it work well? Does it have the calls to action where you want them? Is it display in a way that highlights your cemetery's features and your care that you provide? A good design team should be looking at that for you already. I'll talk about that a little more later, but look at it yourself. Make sure it's satisfactory to what you want. So just be careful of that, these red flags. Now, who is your target audience? So there's a couple common ones. Elderly, of course, And right in line with that, children visiting, helping their parents, whether it's pre-planning or whether it's handling an at-need case. Obviously, I would say for pretty much 100% of all cemetery websites, these are two target audiences. But there's a couple interesting ones I want to talk about before I come back to those two target audiences. We have a number of customers who target vendors as part of their website because they want people to understand the rules of working on the cemetery, working at the cemetery. They want to provide a way of submitting jobs and insurance forms, which ultimately streamlines the process for the cemetery internally. One I really like, especially from our more progressive customers, is targeting a specific generation, and millennials is a big one. There's, like I mentioned before, a shift in culture. So we'll have some of those progressive cemeteries focus an entire part of their site on green burials, which is showing a lot of popularity in the millennial and younger generations. So again, you can serve all of these audiences within one site. It doesn't have to be, oh, we can only serve one, but who you decide to serve will change the messaging, the images, and the offerings. And then out of that, there comes specific technical and build concerns out of that. So I'm going to talk about a couple of those because this is crucial to making sure your site works for your audience. I'm going to specifically focus on probably the most difficult one to build for because of just physical constraints is elderly, and then there's often a fairly large overlap of individuals with disabilities. So you can see kind of the problem on the left, solution on the right, but just to highlight a few of these large clickable areas. Hand tremors are a thing. I've sat with users throughout my career who have hand tremors. Make it easy to click. Don't get in the way of the user clicking. Big buttons, good pieces of text to click on. Also let the user scroll. It's much easier to scroll on a mouse or of course scroll on a phone. You have no choice than trying to find and click every little link. Let users scroll. Another is high contrast. Google, actually, interestingly enough, uses this as a ranking signal for how usable your site is, which actually can help your rankings within the Google search results. Is your site legible and readable? Don't put text on a very busy background. That makes it extremely challenging for, honestly, anybody to read. Also, make your site succinct. And I always like to provide the concept of less words up front, more pictures, and as people choose to dive in, start putting up more words. For better or worse, users don't want to read. Their attention spans say they want information quickly. They want to be able to find it quickly. Let them choose to dive deep, but don't put everything on your homepage. All the text you ever could want. That's not going to help you. Design for accessibility. So the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, has accessibility recommendations and requirements for building an accessible website. 1.3 million Americans are legally blind. Huge audience. Additionally, approximately 30% of the world's population has or needs corrective vision, and it keeps getting worse for me every year. Designed for that. I've seen the most extreme case. I was very lucky to work with a very smart gentleman, Dr. Modi, back when I was in aerospace, and he's legally blind. And I had the opportunity to sit next to him as we were working together on a project, and his computer read to him, and he could hear faster than I could see. It was amazing to watch him interact with his computer. What was even more interesting is he had a keyboard that would literally create the braille for him, so he could read the site with his fingers as he was rapidly moving through the pages. And I commented on it, of course, because I found it extremely interesting given my own user experience background. And he said, yeah, but Jason, he said, people have to think about that. If they don't, I literally can't use what they built. So designing for accessibility does take more work. It does take more time, but especially with states like California enacting accessibility laws and requirements, as California goes, New York tends to follow and other states tend to follow. I think it's worth it, and I would highly recommend designing for accessibility at all times. Again, a good design team should be thinking about this for you already. And the last thing is simple and intuitive navigation. Generally speaking, a person can only hold about 5 to 9 items in their short-term memory. Don't be like a customer who came to us. They wanted to rebuild a site. They recognized they had issues. They had 15 menu items in their main menu. And once you started drilling down into the sub menus, it totaled about 164 menu items. You can't track that. Nobody can keep track of that. And especially when you're considering the elderly demographic, the number of items held in short-term memory gradually reduces with age. It's also, again, difficult to click through a menu like that. So simple and intuitive. If everything's important, nothing's important. So think about that part. What's great about building for accessibility, you get a couple kind of freebies out of that as well. By supporting those accessibility and build requirements, you actually support a number of design requirements. Many of the same principles apply to mobile. For example, the big click buttons. Our fingers are pretty accurate, but if you ever try to click a tiny little link on a website, it's not good. So you get that for free. In addition, you also appease the mighty Google. Now, when people talk about search engines, 95% of the time they're talking about Google. John Mueller, who's a search advocate at Google, I really like listening to his podcast and keeping up with what he talks about how to keep your site working well in Google search engine optimization. But he summarized all of his advice with this sentence here is build well-designed sites that are usable, provide good value, good, valuable, original content. So that usable, he puts that first, well-designed and usable. Google keys off of that. Google rewards that. Keep that in mind when you're choosing your demographic and then how you build for that demographic. You'll get that as part of that build. Item 3, closely related to the demographics and the build of that is your site flow and user experience. Where does your site take your visitors? Now, one of my designers, Megan, has a quote that I love, which is, you want your users to have a slide, not an obstacle course. What does a slide on a website look like? Well, there's some practices that you'll notice on a site that gets you to where you want to go. First of all, not everything needs its own page. Scrolling is okay and honestly preferred in many cases because it lets people explore. There's actually a mental weight, you might have felt it yourself, in clicking a link to open a page. Maybe you're the person who has 300 tabs open because you don't want to lose your spot, but you want to read that thing later. Well, scrolling doesn't have that same mental weight. It also is better in alignment with phones and mobile design. This one is super critical to our industry in the wording you use. Keep in mind, if you're designing for your customers, not for yourself, use common words, not interment options, burial options, because that's what people are going to be searching for. And we can see that, with the many sites that we have, we can see what people look for. Burial options is far more coming up in that list. So design for the terms that you want Google to find and that you want your users to read when they're on your site of what they're expecting. You can guide them, get them to the right spot, but if they don't know what the right term is, they might just leave your site. One call to action. We had one customer sign up for a new website, and as we were looking over their previous website, they had no less than 4 brightly colored buttons, a banner bar at the top, and 2 pop-up windows, all with things to do. If I had been a user and not somebody who was getting ready to rebuild their site, I would have closed it and gone away. It was too much. One call to action, possibly a second sub call, depending if you're serving multiple audiences, but one primary call to action within the screen. Again, another slide, make your contact information readily accessible. Don't make it difficult to find out how to contact you. There's some good practices there. Put your contact information in the footer. Users have been trained to go to the footer for contact information. That's one area. You can have it on every single page on your site if you do something like that. All right, so if your users ever look like this when they're visiting your website, right? Ultimately, that leads back to the problem with this. This is a conversion funnel. Any salesperson, marketing person worth their salt is aware of this. When people are on your site, they're in that top line right there. They're in the awareness. But if your site gives them an obstacle course, you're going to narrow that bottom part of the funnel unnaturally. You're always going to lose a few people as they visit and move throughout your site. But if you want them to take action at the bottom part of that funnel, it's important that that you make it easy for them to get there. Create that slide to the bottom of the funnel. Hence Megan's quote from earlier. A couple other things to consider in your site build. I always get the question, well, what pages should we have on our site? I've put a few of the most common, and especially the ones that you should have on your site. Now, if you're an enterprise, like a conglomerate level cemetery, or you're an association, or you have, events in your hometown that you are sponsoring, there may be other things here. This isn't the end all be all list, but this is a great starting point. And if you're missing any of these pages, you might want to ask yourself, why? Is that being done very intentionally, or are you just missing those pages? So the one I do want to put a little bit of a caveat here on is the articles blog pages. They can be super valuable. They create an area where knowledge can be shared and you can create a lot of trust. But if it's not an area that you can commit to updating on a semi-regular basis, I would say at least once a quarter, maybe even more frequently than that, of writing a new post or a new article, then it actually starts to have the reverse effect. And if you've ever been to the site where it has information that was written in 2012, and that's the last article you see, it kind of makes you go, I don't know about this. It's one of those digital trust things that I mentioned earlier. So just be aware of that one. Make sure you can commit and stick to building regular content for your site if you're going to sign up for articles and blog posts. Don't forget, menu, header, footer, calls to action. There are tried and true practices. You don't win any awards for being different for different sake. Over the past 20, 25 years, users have been trained to operate with websites a specific way. Meet those expectations, basically. Again, I mentioned the contact information in the footer. Make sure menus don't just disappear off the top, or they're in places that users wouldn't expect, or they're hidden behind strange buttons. You'll just hurt yourself ultimately in that. Design for the customers who are coming to your site. Support them in what they're looking for. Along those same lines, similar to real estate, location is crucial on your website, because in the English language, we read from top left to the right and down. The most important part of your site is in the top left side of your page. It's at the top of your site. So if you're on a desktop, top left. If you're on mobile, everything important should be closer to the top of your site. What you want your users to see first. If they would scroll and go away, what do you want them to come away from? Put it at the top. Another important principle is that attractive things work better. It's the first time I've ever gotten to search for beautiful people while I'm building slides, but it's true. We are wired to give attractive things more credibility, more tolerance, and approach it with a more open mind. Don Norman, a usability engineer and cognitive scientist, has proven this out with many studies that this is a true statement. So if you get nothing else from my presentation today, if you walk away with nothing else, you want your website is your digital front gate. Make it beautiful. Make it show off the beauty. And there are beautiful cemeteries out there. Coming from outside the industry, when I started visiting these cemeteries on my own and with my CEO, Nick Timpey, beautiful places, show that off. You can see here we have historic Oakwood Cemetery's front gate down in Raleigh, North Carolina. There's their website there. You can check it out. That's one of the Web Cemetery's websites that we built for them. But notice they've got a beautiful cemetery. Notice how the website highlights that. It highlights the important things they're doing in their community. It highlights their important efforts, and it does it in a beautiful way. Again, creating that credibility and that trust with your users. The last of the 4 pillars that I talked about in the beginning is the technical, getting into kind of I call this the nerd section, kind of the nitty gritty of the technical. Now, before I go into it, I want to share the information so you can be aware of it, but a good team supporting you in this should already be thinking of these things. If they're not, that's not a good thing if they're not already thinking about these. The first is what's called responsive design. This is a fancy term for works as well on desktop as it does on a tablet, as it does on a mobile device. Like I mentioned earlier, in our industry, somewhere between 50 to 70%, it tends to scale a little closer to the 50% side, but 50 to 70% of your users are going to be on their phones when they find your website. Of those, 61% of mobile searchers are more likely to contact your business if you have a mobile friendly site. So What does that mean? Well, when it comes up, the text is easy to read. They don't need to do the pinch and scroll zoom thing. Buttons are easily clickable. All the things I've been talking about up to this point should come through well on a mobile device. And quite frankly, that should be how any designer worth their salt is thinking about things. Responsive design should be just part of a good design these days. Another one, and we often get asked about this at Web Cemeteries, is search engine optimization, or SEO. Now, the topic of SEO could be 20 presentations on its own, and you can see that SEO isn't just a singular thing. On this particular graphic here, you can see that there's multiple areas that SEO covers, some of which is part of what I'm talking about today is in the build of the website. So your design team, your development team, or if you're doing it yourself, should be thinking about what wording goes on the pages, the content, how it's laid out, how the design's done, snippets, the way crawlers, search engine crawlers would be crawling through your website. All that needs to be thought about. There's other SEO topics around digital marketing, optimization, social media. That's not necessarily part of the site build directly, but again, this should be thought of as part while you're building the site, not tacked on later. It should be integrated with the site. This is Jason's personal pet peeve. I will summarize my pet peeve with this statement: a Ferrari with a Yugo engine is not a Ferrari. What my pet peeve is build a beautiful site and then you host it on $3 a month hosting. Now, the price isn't actually really the problem. It's the fact of what the price implies. There's tons of web hosts out there that host up your website, serve your website up to your customers. But if you're doing, for example, shared hosting, then your site is going to feel slower. And for better or worse, the statistics show that if your site takes longer than 2.1 seconds to become interactive and to start working with your customer, you're going to start losing them. They're going to start dropping out of the funnel, like I showed earlier. So the goal is not to get the cheapest hosting. I would never recommend that to anybody. A good host should be thinking about these items. And again, a designer or developer should be recommending a good host to you. But these are things that can make your site faster, can protect your site. In fact, we had a customer who showed up in the news for various reasons, and as a result, got the attention of Russia and China. And we saw a huge spike. We were monitoring their site. We saw a huge spike in traffic from Russia and China, except their site didn't even bat an eye because we protected their site with good hosts, good security, and they kept right on rolling with that without seeing any effect on their site. Cheaper hosts would not have done that. All right. So I got through the main 4 points. There's always a question of, well, what else? And there's 3 things that we generally get asked about as we're working with our cemeteries and as we're working with various customers. The first is social media. So social media can be a valuable thing. It can provide an avenue to target users with events, to demonstrate your knowledge as a cemetery care team, and to demonstrate that you're there to serve families. But I'm going to be blunt. Most people are not going to follow you on social media. Don't measure your success of social media on that alone. Instead, use social media as a trust factor. So for example, I mentioned the cemeteries near me search that I did earlier. Well, if I found that, oh, hey, here's a cemetery near me. Oh yeah, they're posting, maybe something important going on in their cemetery, and they did that, 3 days ago. Oh, they're active. They're taking care of their cemetery. That's one of those little trust factors. Local business listings. Oh, actually, before I continue on, I should mention social media does suffer from the same effect that I talked about with blogs. If you're not going to be able to keep it updated regularly, it might actually end up hurting you more than helping as far as trust, if it's been 2.5 years since you last posted something to your social media. So keep that in mind, again, if you're signing up to do that. Local business listings, and I'm specifically going to talk about Google My Business. Google My Business is the digital generation's yellow pages. You've probably seen it. You could go to Google now and search for a name of a local business in your area, and if they're active at all online, you'll see their business listing. They'll show the name of their company and some photos of them, contact number, hours, links to their website, et cetera, et cetera. Go and claim that. Go to business.google.com. It's free. There's a verification process to prove that you are the owner of that business, that you're running that business. Don't let that slide. That is another trust factor. And if you don't control it, it's not that you're not there. Your cemetery might be listed right now in Google business listings. You might be getting 1-star reviews. Make sure you grab it and make sure you manage it, respond, interact with those who are looking for you. Again, it's a freebie. Don't give it up. The last is digital marketing. At Web Cemetery, so digital marketing first can be important. There's some really good reasons to do digital marketing. What I'll first say is build on a solid foundation, build on a bedrock first. So all the stuff I talked about building a good website, make sure that's in place first before you begin your digital marketing campaign. And once you begin your digital marketing campaign, at Web Cemeteries, we work with some really great organizations, such as Welton's organization at Ring Ring Marketing. They do a phenomenal job for our industry in providing digital marketing services. But again, build on a solid foundation first, because you gain some natural visibility. And of course, if you're driving people to your site, you want to keep them in that funnel. So if you're coming off of ad campaigns or such, you want them to ultimately take the action that you want them to take. So again, to reiterate, there's 4 areas I would recommend focusing. Again, there's tons more that we could be talking about, but these are the most important. Purpose of your site, your demographics, the site flow, and then the technical aspects of your site. So again, I want to thank you for attending today. Thank Vincent and Maddie again for having me here. My name is Jason Cavett, it's Web Cemetery's CTO. I did put some websites. These are some of our websites that we've designed at Web Cemeteries. You can feel free to check them out. And if you have any questions, please, I think we have time for a couple here, Vince, and please feel free to reach out to me. You have my email address there.
That was a great presentation, Jason. I just love some of the analogies that you use. You know, in the cemetery world, we're so focused on the grounds, the maintenance. I mean, there's such beautiful cemeteries, but you use the analogy of maintaining the website like you maintain your grounds. And I think that really resonated with me, and just making the websites attractive, you know, that key takeaway. Well done. Like you mentioned, I think we have a little bit of time for questions if someone wanted to put that either in the Q&A box or even in the chat. As you type your question, one thing that came to mind, Jason, and I just was curious on your opinion on it, being an expert in the field here, is, you know, obviously you mentioned building trust with your community through your website. What is your opinion on having staff bios and having the staff of the cemetery, perhaps your sales counselors, in a section on your website? Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's something, there's comfort that when you walk into a cemetery, or if you're interacting with somebody over email, you can picture them in your mind. People respond very strongly to faces. So there's comfort in that. Oh, if I walk into a cemetery, there's Joe. I've been talking with Joe and he's a great guy. And now I can see his face, but I knew what it looked like. But if you have turnover, don't forget to update it, because that can feel old, or like it can feel like you missed something, which again will key into that trust factor. So as long as you can stay on top of that, or whoever's hosting your website can help you stay on top of that, absolutely can help out. What I would caution against is listing your 27 people who work at your cemetery. I would put front-facing people, maybe some of the leaders of the cemetery. I wouldn't necessarily recommend every single person, however. Yeah,
that's great input. I was curious about that from your perspective. The other thing that we oftentimes see is these days more and more is videos on the landing page of a website. What is your thought on using videos, using, you know, whether it's an owner of the cemetery with a welcome or even just a video of the grounds? Are you seeing a lot of that in the work you're doing?
We see some of that. In fact, Forest Lawn's website that I have listed there uses a video when you land on their page. Videos can be very powerful. So the ones that show the grounds is part of that beauty, show the beauty. One thing you have to keep in mind is If someone's on a mobile platform, you might not want the video to run, or it needs to be heavily optimized because that can increase loading time as part of the request. So just be cautious there. What I would caution is don't have sound autoplay ever. Nobody likes that. You're hustling for the mute button. One thing I also like is some people like to watch a video of maybe, the president of the cemetery talking about how they care. That's good. Offer an option to read as well, though. So maybe transcribe what the video says into you want to read what he says instead, offer that as well, because some people just prefer to read as opposed to watching video. It also keys well with SEO because the text is literally crawlable and searchable.
Mm-hmm. Wow, a lot of good info. I really personally have learned a lot just in the last 45 minutes. It's always great in my role to experience that, and I'm sure for the folks who are on the call, everyone's taken away a few key takeaways, a few nuggets of information. And that's really a big part of why we like to do this, because Johnson Consulting, we have our certain areas of expertise. We have, like I mentioned on the front of the call, a tremendous amount of industry experience within the organization, but to tap some organizations like Web Cemeteries, just again, delivering exceptional value to the people who are on the call today and our clients in general. So thanks again. I'm just looking, I don't see any questions it looks like we may have one that came through here. I noticed that your company also digitizes burial records. How is that accomplished, Jason?
All right, absolutely. So we have a process, and I'd be happy to discuss with you separately as well if you want real fine-grained detail. But we have a process where we will actually send folks to your site, scan the records. They don't leave your site. We got to protect those. Those records are crucial to running a cemetery, right? We scan them in there. Then we have a team that takes that, and we've built tooling specifically designed around taking that information and converting that into online records. And in Web Cemeteries, we do have a full-blown management system that runs the entire, can run your entire cemetery. So we digitize those, bring them into a system so you can search your records from a digital standpoint, but you get a copy of the original scanned records attached with, we bring in a decedent, we bring in an owner, we bring in a contract, whatever it might be, you can still view the original record digitized. So important because we have had cases. We had one customer who, unfortunately, before they signed up with us, had a water main break and it flooded some of their records. So still want to have your paper records, but getting them online gives you basically a backup. And so that's something I personally strongly encourage cemeteries to consider. And then, of course, bringing it into a system that allows you to manage your cemetery further enhances that value. Absolutely. And if you're wanting to talk more about that, I'd be happy to chat with you on some of the specifics on that. It's a pretty cool process.
Thanks, Jason. It looks like we have another question that came through in the chat here. How do you feel about having links for local businesses on the site that will benefit the visitor? Absolutely. Yeah. So that can be good, because one of the areas that's important is you're serving the families in this difficult time. If there's something that you as a cemetery that do not specifically take care of, right? So maybe you don't, well, this is probably not the case. Maybe you don't work with flowers, but you want to send families to a trusted partner or a trusted vendor. That can absolutely be helpful in doing that. One of the things, though, is you do want to be cautious in putting everybody you've ever worked with that you overwhelm your users. I find that a lot of those referrals tend to be better done in person, because then you can hear the needs of the family rather than just here's a place to go, here's a place to go, and here's a place to go, and letting them kind of figure it out. They're already in a tough time. Giving them more decisions to make can make that more challenging. I know I'm preaching to the choir on this one. So careful guidance, I would caution with that. Not bad, not good, careful. Yes, it seems like the question that I asked about having your staff on your website, some other inclusions, some possible inclusions on the website, just have to sort of explore those with a little bit more depth to really understand what the intent is and perhaps what the benefits and what costs might be associated with it. But and always, like I said, keep that question in your mind. How does it help the families that you're serving? If you're always asking back to that question and you can answer that question well, you
ultimately don't really go wrong. That's really what it boils down to if I summarize my presentation up.
Yeah, it relates so much to part of what we do in my department specifically is, customer-centered workshops, where we really are forcing a committee of the cemetery organization to walk in the shoes of the customer from the time they're called through the entire journey. So those themes run deep in so much of the work that cemetery owners and managers are doing, not only with their families, but every touch point, including the website, like you talk about today. So great stuff, great information. Any other questions? I'm not seeing any new ones here. Jason, anything else?
Nope. I again, thank you guys for your time today, and I appreciate it. I hope this was helpful. Like I said, I love showing off our customers' grounds and the care that they take for these families. You guys do a wonderful job. So thank you.
Well, I can say firsthand that this was an excellent piece of information, excellent presentation, and thank you for joining us. With that, I'll turn things back over to Maddie to wrap it up.
Yeah, and absolutely, just piggybacking off of what Vince said, amazing educational tool here. So we really appreciate it, Jason. And thank you as well, Vince, and everyone for attending. We will be sending an email out in the next 24 to 48 hours with the information you heard here today, as well as a link to the webinar on YouTube. So once again, if questions do arise, please feel free to contact Jason. Info is up there, and we will also be providing that in the email, or you can contact the JCG team at info@johnsonconsulting.com, or our sister company, Funeral Results Marketing, could be a good resource for questions of this nature. So you can contact them at info@funeralresults.com as well. And as we said, we will be providing this information in the next 24 to 48 hours. So be on the lookout for that. And with that, have a great rest of your day, everyone, and a great week.